Shout out to Kopish.
Shout out to Kop-Ish, guys.
All the good work
the
up.
two legends, Emil Heskey, Howard Gill. Can't get much better than that, guys. Yeah. You know what to do now. Like, comment, subscribe. I'm with legends, guys. Kopish. Hello, lovely people. Hope you're all well. We are back with a special Kicking It with Kop-Ish, and guys, we are absolutely delighted to be joined by the one, the only James Pearce. James, how are you doing, sir?
Yeah, I'm very good, thanks. How are you guys? You okay?
Good.
Thanks for coming.
Very well, thank you.
Yeah, really appreciate it, James. Really appreciate it.
No problem.
I was going to ask you just off the bat. So, what is the one thing that you took for granted before lockdown and the sort of pandemic that you won't take for granted when hopefully things go back to some sort of normality?
Oh, wow. So many things. I think probably professionally, just fans being inside grounds is, people keep saying to me, and they've said it to me probably for the best part of a whole year now, you're so lucky to still be able to go to the games. And I feel a bit ungrateful saying to them that it's pretty miserable and pretty soulless going to empty football grounds week after week. And there isn't much joy in being able to say you're there. And I guess probably with the one exception being the night when Liverpool lifted the Premier League trophy. Of course, that was a huge honour. But yeah, by and large, it just makes you appreciate all those little things that you just took for granted. The thing about going to meet one of your mates for a quick drink in the pub a couple of hours before the game, and seeing all the host of former Liverpool players that work in the media, seeing them in the press room beforehand, bumping into club officials, the mix zones afterwards that have obviously they've completely been ended in terms of I haven't done any face-to-face player interviews for nearly a year now, so it's completely changed the way that you have to try and do the job, and you have to try and do the best you can over Zoom and over the phone and stuff. But I think it's been incredibly difficult for everyone, hasn't it? And I suppose personally, the one thing I'll never take for granted again is teachers, because homeschooling kids is an absolute nightmare. So I was doing some fractions not long before I came on air with you guys. So you've saved me from some more maths for 8-year-olds.
So just sticking with the stadium, James. Obviously, you still have the honour of still being at the grounds and stuff. I'm guessing at first it must have been surreal, because obviously you're in the ground. Now, obviously, when you're there, you still hear the players shouting, but it's going to be a lot more emphasised when there are no fans there. So at first, it must have been like really sort of fun being there and a really different feeling. But now, I won't say tedious, but is it now a case of you just want fans back now? Like the sort of novelty's worn off now?
Yeah, I think that's spot on. I think you're right, because it was such a gap from the middle of March to the back end of June when football finally came back. It was really exciting to still, get to go to the games again, and fascinating in a way to start off with, because you're right, you did suddenly hear things that you would just never hear before, because you could, every word that got said, and you could hear which players are a lot more vocal than others, and sometimes you'd even hear word for word what Klopp was saying and shouting onto the field. But over time, it's definitely fair to say that novelty wore off. And because I've also, because a lot of clubs have been quite strict and only limiting press passes to one journalist per organisation. So there's been a number of away games where our kind of home reporter for the Athletic has used the press pass, and I've had to watch it on TV at home, like most fans. And I do feel with the fake crowd noise, it does give a very artificial feeling to what it is, because having been there in empty grounds, I just think, and people say, oh, it's an excuse, but I do think it is a real reason behind what's happened to Liverpool this season. Of course, not as big as the injuries, not as big as some other things, but it's still a reason, because Liverpool plays such an emotional brand of football under Jurgen Klopp, and he's prided himself on that special bond that exists between players and supporters. that I spoke to a player recently who said no one wants to use it as an excuse, but it's really hard because everything has to come from within. Where before, you would get inspired by your surroundings, inspired by the noise. Everything now, it has to be generated from within the dressing room, and that can be difficult. And I've seen loads of games at Anfield where Liverpool have struggled this season, where I've looked around and thought, if this ground was full, there's no way that this game would be going like it is at the moment. I think back to the goalless draw against Manchester United in the league, where that game drifted in the second half, and I just think the intensity of the crowd would have. We've all seen it time and time again.
Yeah.
I mean, the impact that has on the tempo and intensity of the football in front of the fans.
No, definitely.
I've been saying that. I know it can't be an excuse, but I've been saying without Liverpool having that cop shouting, man, it's affecting us. There's no doubt in my mind. Teams like Arsenal, Man City, no shade. Those teams don't really even care about how much their fans sing because they don't really make noise anyway. It affects us. Those teams are just getting on with it. It's bothering us. I can see it. I can see it.
Yeah, 100%. And there's loads of knock-on effects of that as well, because I think it's what it does for the Liverpool players in terms of inspiring them. It's the way in which it intimidates and forces mistakes from opponents, right down to influencing referees at times. All of that has gone. And I there's just, even things like, opponents time wasting and little spoiling tactics, things that would really rile fans and get the atmosphere going, and then that would inevitably get Liverpool going. It just, in an empty ground, you just don't have that.
Yeah, definitely. And just quickly as well, James, in regards to like the fans as well, do you kind of feel like because the fans aren't there, they play such an influence in terms of getting on the opposition's back? So normally, again, like whether it's a derby or whether it's a Man City or Man United, the fans are literally on the opposition back. You get ex-players that talk about it, that say, going to Anfield is actually intimidating. Whereas now, fans aren't there. I think maybe players feel more at ease knowing that they're not going to get heckled.
Yeah. And I think there was a moment where what you said then struck home with me. I think it was quite early on against Man City. Henderson messed up a kick and knocked it out of play. And you think, if that had been a packed Anfield, everyone would have been onto him. And then, do you know what? He'd have been jittery the next time the ball came to his feet. A minute, 2 minutes later, whatever. But you just don't have that. Even a couple of weeks ago, as good as Jordan Pickford, was in the Merseyside derby. I think you probably see a very different Jordan Pickford if that is 54,000 people.
100%.
People will say it's an excuse. To me, it's not an excuse. It's an explanation. I think there was even a quote from Pep Guardiola after City won at Anfield for, what was it, the first time in 18 years. And he said himself, winning at Anfield with and without fans is very different. And, I don't think anyone could sum it up better than Pep Guardiola did that day.
Yeah, you have to respect Guardiola for that as well, because many other managers would have just left it as the win and then celebrated, but he actually acknowledged it. Just wanted to ask you again. So obviously you being in the stadium and hearing who are vocal now, Jordan Henderson from the outside looking in, and everyone can see it, is probably the most vocal player on the football pitch. Are there any players who are very vocal who us as fans may not actually realise are as vocal as they may actually be?
Do you know what? I wouldn't say there's been any big surprises. No, I think Henderson has been by far and away the most vocal. And then followed by James Milner probably when he's played in the games that I've been at. So no, I think it just kind of like reinforces, I think, what we probably already knew in terms of just how influential they are on and off the pitch, those two. In terms of not only are they amazing professionals in terms of the way they conduct themselves, but they do cajole and get the best out of everyone around them.
Brilliant stuff. So unfortunately, we changed the mood now, and we speak about a club legend who unfortunately passed away very recently, Ian St. John, an absolute club legend, club icon. He is one of the sort of foundation pieces, along with Shankly, and maybe Ron Yeats, who came to the club at a time where we weren't as glamorous, we weren't that awe-inspiring Liverpool, and he turned around and helped turn around our fortunes, and now we are the club that everyone's proud of. What are your sort of best memories of Ian St. John, and how do you think he'll be remembered in years to come?
Yeah, it's funny because I think I was born in '77, so I was, I never had the honour, obviously, of watching Ian St. John play, but when I think of him, I think of my youth being 8, 9, 10 years of age and playing football matches on a Saturday morning, and it was part of the ritual to rush back home and have lunch in front of St. Grevesy. That was absolutely like you just couldn't miss it. It was like fantastic viewing, and it was only really subsequently that, as a Liverpool fan growing up, you kind of learn from my dad. Not only is this fella this really accomplished, guy in the media, brilliant presenter, funny guy that everyone loves, got amazing contacts all the way through football. This is actually one of the most iconic names in Liverpool's history. And then, I remember reading up about him and, the partnership that he had with Roger Hunt. And as you said, he's one of the big reasons, Ian St. John, why we've got the Liverpool Football Club we've got today. Because, when he came in, Liverpool were a second division team. And, and Shankly gave him the big sell when he came in from Motherwell. It was a club record signing. I think the only way you could probably compare it to the current day would probably be signing him and Ron Yeats would be the equivalent of signing Alisson and Virgil van Dijk in terms of the impact they had on the team. Not only did they get Liverpool back into the first division, he was part of 2 title-winning teams, and of course that made an FA Cup victory in 1965. And I was fortunate enough to interview Ian St. John many times over the years, and and again, probably in the modern era, we probably don't appreciate just how big that was for Liverpool winning the FA Cup in 1965, because the FA Cup was the pinnacle back then. That was the one that everyone wanted. Liverpool had never won it. Yeah. It was the Holy Grail, and for him to score the winning goal, I think it was 8-9 minutes to go. Ian Callaghan's cross, diving header. I know how much that meant to him. I remember doing an interview with him. Would have been on the 50th anniversary in 2015, and he was just, although he was a very proud Scotsman, but in many ways, he was an adopted Scouser, really, in terms of just what this city and what the club meant to him. Definitely
goes down as legendary in this club standing, and one of the greatest Scotsmen to ever play the game as well. I think that sometimes gets forgotten, how great a player he was in general. Do you think we'll see another player like Ian St. John in the future? Obviously it's difficult to comprehend because all of us are sitting here. We hope to never, ever be in the second tier of English football. But in terms of a player who could have, let's be honest, gone to a higher caliber club at the time, but yet chose Bill Shankly, do you think we'll ever replicate anything like that in the future, or if football will replicate it?
Yeah, I probably don't think so, because I just think football's changed so much, hasn't he? He played in an era where there was very little difference. There was between footballers and your working man who went to the game every week. You still had players going on the bus to training, and it was just a very, very different time. And I think that was probably what enabled Ian St. John to just transfer across and have that amazing career in the media. Because I remember, when I moved to Liverpool as a student, and then permanently when I worked for the Liverpool Echo, he was this big media personality on Merseyside. He had his show on Radio City, and he was very, very good at it. And I think a key part of that was he understood supporters. He wasn't. I think these days we talk a lot about footballers being detached from reality, which I think is fair to a degree. I think I just think the game everything has changed, where you're never gonna get another Ian St. John. It's just impossible to roll the years back to that. But I think that was what made him so special, and why we've seen such a massive outpouring of emotion for him since he tragically passed away at the age of 82. Because I think everyone felt a real close affinity with him. He wasn't he wasn't detached. He was, you know, I think most fans, anyone that had ever had the honour of meeting him, like I had, you know, you felt like he was, you know, he was one of you really, in terms of he understood the club. It meant everything to him. He was this legend, you know, iconic figure. You know, one of, you know, his partnership with Roger Hunt, you know, is right up there with the greatest in Liverpool's entire history. You know, you'd probably be talking about that alongside, you know, kind of Keegan and Toshak. So yeah, he was just a special guy, and just really, really sad. I knew obviously that he'd had health problems in recent years, but no, there'll never be another Ian St. John, and you know, he'll certainly always be remembered.
Indeed, yeah. Rest in peace, Ian St. John, and condolences and thoughts and prayers with his family and friends at this sad, unfortunate time. So, James, obviously you're one of the most recognisable journalists, not just in the Liverpool sort of stratosphere, but in the UK football scene in general. Just explain to us a bit about your journey and how you've become James Pearce, and now you're the superstar journalist James Pearce. How has that all happened? How's that come about?
I don't know, to be honest. It's been great to. I feel very, very lucky and fortunate to have been given the opportunities that I have done. I mean, I grew up in Bath in the southwest of England. My aunt was a Scouser, and she bought me a scarf and a shirt when I was 5 or 6, and that was pretty much it.
Great woman.
Yeah. And, it's funny because although, you know, obviously growing up 200 miles away from Liverpool, it was everyone in my class at primary school was either Liverpool or Everton. You know, it was, you know, you're talking about 83, 84, 85, 86. You know, the two absolute powerhouses of English football at the time. And so like, you know, a lot of kids, I grew up, you know, desperate to be Ian Rush. There was never much chance of that with my lack of footballing ability, unfortunately. So do you know what? Even from about the age of 10 or 11, I'd kind of like, I don't really know what it was, but in my head, I'd always thought, you know what? If you can't play it, you know, imagine. It just fascinated me that people's job was actually writing about football. I remember, like, because my parents used to get papers delivered, and I remember thinking, like, what a job. Like, I'd read obviously every word of the sports section, and I'd think, you know, what a job that is. That is actually people's job to go and watch football, and they actually get paid for it. So yeah, from about the age of 12 or 13, I was doing work experience with the local paper down in Bath, and then I came to Liverpool Uni as a student in 1996. You know, and that was brilliant because that was like the first time in my life I was able to go to the games every week. You know, October 1990 was my first trip to Anfield when my dad took me when I was 12. So but yeah, university they were 3 brilliant years, because I think there were obviously Roy Evans was manager then, and it was, you know, Houllier took over towards the end. Just fantastic times. And then after university, I got a job back home. I couldn't get a job in Liverpool, so I went back home to Bath, worked on the local paper down there for 5 years. Always wanted to come back to Liverpool if I could. You know, that was always the dream to write about Liverpool. And then, yeah, thankfully, very fortunate, in 2005, just after Istanbul, actually, I moved back up permanently, worked at the Echo, and kind of slowly worked my way up, really, because you know, I was kind of like the person who did all the odd jobs. Kind of when I started there, it was, you know, obviously everyone wanted to write about the football, so I was doing, you know, the gymnastics, the hockey, the judo, the fencing, just honestly anything that, like, basically anything that anyone else, if anything left over that no one else wanted to do, I'd get sent and report on it. So and it was ironic, really, because it was actually Liverpool being in a real mess under Hicks and Gillette that gave me the opportunity to start writing about Liverpool regularly, because the Liverpool reporter at the time at the Echo was a guy called Tony Barrett, who I'm sure lots of people know, who actually now works for the club. And you know, he said to our boss at the time, you know, the club's so crazy and dysfunctional at the moment, you almost need someone to cover the football and someone to cover the politics of Hicks and Gillette and the debt and the takeover and the politics and the fighting and all the infighting in the boardroom. And so that kind of opened up an opportunity to move over. And then, and then it was a few more years after that. It was actually just after Kenny Dalglish had come back as manager in, what was that, early 2011, that I became the Echo's Liverpool reporter. And then, 8.5 years of doing that right the way through Kenny. And then, of course, Brendan Rodgers and then Jurgen Klopp. And then, not far off 2 years ago now, The Athletic approached me asking whether, they were expanding from America into the UK to cover the Premier League, and said, would you be interested in coming to work for us? And it just felt like a really good time to take on a bit of a different challenge and a new opportunity. And certainly no regrets on that front.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you that, going from obviously writing at the Echo and being so close to Liverpool Football Club, when the Athletic approached, obviously they were a growing powerhouse in America, and we all knew they were coming over here. Did you not have any reservations where you're like, I'm in a really good place right now, I'm kind of one of the leading journalists here, do I need to move on? Or was it that case of you had that Thiago syndrome where you achieved everything at the Echo for I want a new challenge now?
Yeah, it was a funny one, because I wasn't in any real rush. It wasn't like a situation where it was like, sometimes you could be like a bit miserable in a job and just think, I need to look around first. I wasn't looking around for anything, because I was, in my head, it was the dream job, covering Liverpool Football Club, wherever they went. I followed for 8.5 years at the Echo, and got to travel to some unbelievable places all around the world. All those European campaigns, all those pre-season tours. It was a difficult decision, because I went down to London to see the guys, the founders in America who were over in London ahead of the UK launch. And the biggest thing for me was, it kind of struck a chord in terms of, they kind of said, look, tell us what your day involves at the moment. What are you expected to do day to day? And I said, well, I probably have to write 5 or 6 stories, do a video here and there, do a podcast, on a match day, you do the live blog, you do the team news, you do the video before the game, you might do a video at half time, a video after the game, you've got your 1,000-word match verdict, you've got the player interviews afterwards. And they were just kind of going, well, if you wanted to come work for us, what we would probably want is, rather than you do 5 or 6 stories a day, we want 2 or 3 a week, but we want it in a lot more detail, and it has to be different stuff to what people can get elsewhere, because obviously you're charging it, it's a subscription service, so there's no point me on the Athletic putting out every word from a Jurgen Klopp press conference that's going to be on 20 other websites. It's just nonsensical. So, and the more I thought about it, the more I just thought, do you know what, actually that really appeals to me, because as much as I loved working at the Echo, there had been a shift away in the last few years, away from kind of like, it became all about hits, in terms of, you have to reach so many hits a day and all the rest of it. So I just like the idea that the Athletic was like, look, there's no advertising, there's no hits. It's purely, it's about quality, basically, rather than quantity. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought, do you know what? That's actually a lot more rewarding journalism. So it was a bit of a gamble, because, as you said, like, it wasn't, I did, and right up probably to the day I left, I was thinking, am I really doing the right thing? Because I'd only ever, I'd worked in one place. I'd worked in a newspaper in Bath for 5 years, and then I'd been at the Echo for 14 years. So, I'd only worked in 2 places in 19 years. So it was a bit of a leap of faith. But yeah, 100%. I'm delighted I did it, because as I hoped it would be, I found it really, really rewarding to do things in more detail, and right down to match days, where now, because if I go to an evening game, I'm not having to write during the game. So you can actually, as stupid as it sounds, you're actually able to watch the game properly, which I hope it sounds a stupid thing to do when you're writing about a game. But honestly, if you're writing 1,000 words that have to be filed within 20 minutes of the final whistle, quite often you've got your head buried in your laptop for the last half an hour. Where now, I literally come back after a night game and then start writing at 11 o'clock at night, and I much prefer that, being able to do stuff with a bit of perspective, and hopefully having spoken to a couple of people and just kind of take a bit of a deep breath before doing it, rather than just rattling it out there and then. So yeah, and I like the fact as well, when interviews, that's probably been one of the big changes as well. Like when at the Echo, if you got 5 or 10 minutes with someone, you could get an interview out of that. Where now at the Athletic, realistically, you're probably wanting 30 or 40 minutes with someone, because you want to do things in more depth. And so it's no good to me doing 5 minutes with Trent Alexander-Arnold on we really want to beat Chelsea, or we really want to beat Fulham, or whoever. It's got to be something more substantial, and just trying to be a bit more creative, I suppose, as well. Which again, it's like sometimes people say to me, it must be a lot easier because I'm obviously not filing as many stories as I did before. But I wouldn't say it's easier. I think it's just different, because it's probably actually more challenging, because where before you'd kind of just go from doing the game to the press conference to the next game to the mix zone to the next, and it was just like a cycle, a never-ending cycle. Now, because you're kind of out of that cycle, you're having to come up with kind of more kind of different ideas, with the idea being that obviously because people are having to pay for it, it has to be stuff that they can't get for free anywhere else.
Yeah, fully agree. Speaking of interviews, James, do you remember your first person who was associated to the club that you interviewed, and do you remember how you felt before that interview started?
You know what? I'm trying to think who one from very early on that I always remember is Liverpool played Reading away, and I think it was 2009, and we were unbeaten actually, and it was the first defeat of the season, and Liverpool were absolutely terrible that day. I can't remember exactly what the score was, but
it was 2-1 Reading. 2-1. Gerrard scored in that game, yeah,
and it was. And I remember that was the first time I'd ever covered Liverpool for the Echo on my own, because I wasn't the Liverpool reporter at the time. I think someone might have been sick, and then someone else was on holiday. So it was like they were down to the bare bones and said, "Look, you're going to have to go. You're going to have to do it." And I remember standing in this hall, in this kind of corridor outside the changing rooms at the Majeski Stadium at Reading. And I didn't really even know how a mix zone worked in terms of having to try and ask players to stop. And so I just pretty much asked every player that came by. And as I kind of found out subsequently, it's a lot more difficult to get players to stop, A, if they don't know you, and B, if the team's just lost. So because they didn't know me and they just suffered a humiliating defeat, I was on to a bit of a loser that day. And I must have had 9 or 10 people either say no or look at me like I was completely mad to even ask. And then I asked Peter Crouch, and Peter Crouch was like, "Yeah, of course, mate, no problem." And
such a legend.
Yeah, and like gave me 5 minutes of his time. And I've I don't think I've ever had the chance, actually. I've met him a few times since, but I've never had the chance to tell him how just something little like that just stays with you. Because like if I'd gone back to, I know it sounds ridiculous now, but if I'd gone back to Liverpool that day and had nothing for the back page on the Monday, that would have reflected badly on me. And the fact that he was such a nice fella and gave me that few minutes, that made a big difference. And so yeah, I think it was, when I actually took over as the Echo's Liverpool reporter, it was, I think one of the big thrills was, because I was lucky in the fact that Jamie Carragher and Steven Gerrard had always had a good relationship with the Echo's Liverpool reporters. So, that was, they wanted that to hopefully continue. And of course, you still have to build on those relationships, and you have to still make sure that you do the right things to keep them going. But I'd say that those are memories that really stick out, meeting those guys for the first time. And I think Steven Gerrard's still the only person that I've been kind of genuinely kind of nervous interviewing, because I'd say he's the kind of one who, he was, even though I was not particularly young before, when he was coming through, to me, he was still this he still is this unbelievable icon. So it was always a bit surreal when you were like sat opposite him across a desk doing an interview with him. And I'd say Steven Gerrard, probably the best I've ever, the best player I've ever interviewed in terms of I think in a world now where we're used to a lot of players having, media training and being quite concerned to voice an opinion about certain things. But Steven Gerrard, you just always knew with him, like if you had 5-10 minutes with him, there would be some absolute gold in there, because he always spoke from the heart. He always spoke with great knowledge. And so, yeah, those are the ones that really stand out.
Fair enough. You mentioned Steven Gerrard, so just in light of what you just said there, I suppose you're probably less surprised than most that he's doing so well in management then, if that's how he was back when he was a player.
Yeah, I can't say I'm surprised at all to see him doing so well. I think he's just incredibly driven. He's, I'd say he's probably quite intense at times, but I think you can see that hunger and desire to succeed. And I wondered, going back quite a few years now, you thought because of the era it was, and obviously, it's a different time now where players aren't finishing their careers and having to go into management, financially to pay the bills. I thought to myself, does he really want, having so much stress, had that strain on his shoulders, carrying Liverpool Football Club for so many years? That was my only doubt, was like, would he really want to put himself through that? But, I think the answer's been pretty emphatic so far. And, and I love the fact as well that he started off at the academy, doing his apprenticeship there. I was very lucky to go to most of his games as a manager, and seeing what an impact that had on everyone around him. This absolute inspirational figure in terms of how he developed young talent. I remember Curtis Jones being a part of his youth team that season.
Yeah.
And then just I think he deserves a lot of credit for what he's done at Rangers. I know people. I tweeted something last week, and as is always the case on Twitter, you get 400 smartasses pointing out to you that Celtic aren't very good these days, and it's only Scottish football and all the rest of it. But you only have to look at how Rangers are doing in Europe. I watched their game last week, and they were very, very impressive. Into the last 6 of the Europa League, and I think that's a big thing as well, because I think we all know where Steven Gerrard wants to end up, and it's something that I would absolutely love to see him take over from Klopp whenever that day comes. And I know people will say, does he need another job between Rangers and Liverpool to prove himself further? But I think kind of progress with Rangers in Europe is a big thing, because I think that is testing yourself outside of that comfort zone of Scottish football, and against different styles and formations and all the rest of it. So if he was to take Rangers even further in Europe, that's another big thing for his CV. So yeah, he's doing a fantastic job.
Yeah, it's funny you speak about that, because we've had so many debates on the channel about Gerrard and should he become next manager. So in light of that, you actually the one that sort of pointed out a lot about how well he's doing in Europe and how he's playing his football and the style of football. You also, though, are frightened that his legacy might get tarnished, maybe in the same way sort of a Lampard has. How do you feel now that he's got through to the last 16 with Rangers and sort of drift? Do you still have that reservation?
No, I don't have reservations. I think I think it's more I think it's a bit different. Like Lampard obviously went to Chelsea very, very early on, didn't he? He'd only been at Derby for a short period. And I think the difference with Gerrard is, I don't think Klopp's going anywhere till the summer of 2024. So he's I don't think that job comes up for another 3 and a bit years yet. So, by that point, Steven Gerrard, whether he's still at Rangers or whether he has another job in between, he will have a considerable amount of experience. So, and I think you're right. There's bound to be whenever Steven Gerrard does become Liverpool manager, because I think it will happen one day, regardless. I think it's natural that there'll always be a bit of you thinking you don't want it to vanish memory or the rest of it. But then the thing for me that massively overrides that is imagine Steven Gerrard as manager winning the Premier League, winning the Champions League. Like, to me, I've only seen videos of Kenny Dalglish. Steven Gerrard's the most complete footballer I've ever been able to say that I've been lucky enough to witness, in the flesh. So, if he was to then add to that legacy with trophies as a manager, then he probably takes himself into a whole new level.
Matt Drift,
that's the thing. I need Gerrard to win the Premier League. He didn't get to do it as a player, but I need him to do it as a manager, so he's still done it in whichever way. And to be honest, it'll probably be slightly more rewarding for him to do it as a manager because he came so close 2-3 times as a player and didn't quite get over the line. I'm always going to be worried he'll ruin his legacy if it goes really, really wrong. That's the thing you got. I mean, I don't think it will, but you just never know. Like, if you look at Kenny's second time in charge, for example, thankfully it didn't ruin his reputation, but it could have if it had continued the way it was with Hodgson. So you've always got to just hope that doesn't happen. But you look at what Rangers are doing right now, you can tell there's a style. You can tell there's a way of playing. He's not just up there fluking this. I always say this when people say, why is Pep Guardiola so high in your ratings? Why is Klopp so high in your ratings? It's not just about the trophies they win. When people put Pep down for not winning the Champions League at Bayern Munich, I will always defend him. He's the enemy now, but you lot know I loved him as a player. But I'll always defend him because he made Bayern Munich play better football than they've ever played in their whole history. He won the most points total that they've ever got. It was total football. Yeah, all right. He got skanked against Madrid and Barcelona, dubious decisions here and there and what have you, and he didn't win the Champions League. But the levels of the football they were playing and how good it looked, there's a style and a way Pep, imprints the team. Gerrard's doing that with Rangers. And I'm not shading Lampard. I'm not trying to put him down, but nobody really knew what Chelsea's style of play was. So it wasn't even just about whether he was a good manager with the players, man management and all that. You watched Chelsea and you thought, what kind of is the style? And it's why I kind of rate Arteta, because whether it's working or not, I still know he's got a style of play. I watch Arsenal, I think, okay, there's an identity there of what it is he's trying to do. And Gerrard's got that. So if he brings that to Liverpool and then we start winning something, that would just be the best feeling in the world, man. But, I'm a pessimist. I'm always going to be worried. What if it goes wrong? With Gerrard, if it goes wrong, but then we won't pile on like Chelsea. I think the Chelsea fans got that with Lampard real quick. But as Liverpool fans, we're not going to get on Gerrard's back like that. We'll definitely give him the time it takes. And it'd really have to be like relegation battle before we'd be like, all right, hold on a minute here, Stevie. What's going on here, bro? You get what I mean?
No, 100%, bro. I echo that because, listen, I think me out of you two most, I think I was the one that kind of said maybe he needs to go to another club first because, again, I was so worried about if things went wrong, are we going to look at him differently? But you look at our club and what we do. What we do as a club is this. We give everybody a chance. And I just think no matter who the owners are, doesn't matter who they are, as a club, we always give our managers a chance. And I do think with Steven Gerrard, if he was to become Liverpool manager straight after Jurgen Klopp, I wouldn't have a problem with it. And even to say, let's just say he didn't do that well, I still think we're going to look at him still as the legend Steven Gerrard. And on top of that, I think he's going about it the right way in terms of his development. So as you said, James, the under-18s for me was very key. Picking up things from Jurgen Klopp. And then, that style of play that he now has at Rangers, for me, is something that only I think he would have learned when he went to the under-18s. I think if he just kind of went straight from not playing to just being a manager at Rangers, I think it would have been very different. But I'm glad he done it the right way. And I just feel like now, looking at what Rangers have done, look at where they are, obviously, in Europe, I think whenever Jurgen Klopp does decide to go, and as you said, hopefully it's 2024, and Gerrard does come in, then I'm all for it. He's a legend, and I just think, as you said, it just makes sense. You can see it. He's got the desire. He's had it since a player. You see, as a manager, the intensity that he has, and just his overall like persona to the game. He fits us like a glove. So Steven Gerrard all the way.
I'll tell you something else, Matt, as well. You see, right now, like for example, when we got players who maybe they're not so good at volleying, not so good at shooting, little tips in that. I mean, come on, how amazing it would be for Gerrard to just pull Firmino to one side and be like, bro, please start hitting the ball like this, please. We need you to start putting like, just do it like this. And when he's asking people to do things, they can't even be like, listen to this guy, because they'll be like, oh, do you want me to get involved? Should I get my boots? Do you actually want me to come and show you how to do? Like, that stuff would be amazing. Can you imagine? Like, so that's another reason why I love him.
Very true. So, James, you also mentioned a minute ago that you put out the tweet about Steven Gerrard, and you got people in your comments. Now, obviously, you've got a massive following on social media, which on the surface looks amazing, but I'll be honest, I don't envy you, because I see some of the comments you get sometimes. I'm like, I don't know how he does it. But you've obviously been branded with like little jokey things like bad news, Pearce, and things like that. How does it actually feel being in sort of your stature in journalism, and people kind of hang on to your every word, and they almost wait for you to mess up in a sense? How is that to deal with?
Yeah, I think it's important not to take yourself too seriously. I think otherwise, I think you'd probably be in a bit of a bad spot if you took everything you read on social media to heart. So no, it was. I mean, the bad news Pearce thing. I think that stems from, like I said to you before, like it used like years back when I started. If there was a ridiculous transfer rumor doing the rounds, as far as any transfer rumor, you check it out, and if it wasn't true, you just wouldn't write about it. You just wouldn't, it would just be, oh, it's not true. Move on, write about something else. But I think as times have changed and people have, almost like you just get bombarded when a new rumor suddenly gathers pace, and you've got hundreds and hundreds of people asking you whether something's true or not, and so then you find out whether it is. I think now we're in an age where you feel as if, well, because so many people are asking, even though there's nothing in it, I'm going to have to tell them there is nothing in it. And then what I found to the cost is, obviously, despite all these people asking you whether something's true or not, they didn't actually want to know whether it was true or not. They only wanted to know it was true, not if it wasn't true. So inevitably, if you tell them something's not true, because everyone loves something shiny and new, and regardless of and I'm convinced some of these players, some of the rumors that do the rounds, I'm sure that most of these people kicking off had never even heard of the fella till 10 minutes before, and in that 10 minutes they've decided that this fella is the last piece in the jigsaw and is going to win Liverpool the Champions League. And so then inevitably, if you tell someone that something's not going to happen, then you just get an absolute torrent of abuse with people telling you don't know what you're doing, and all the rest of it. So I suppose the best example of that was the one in January with who was the Dutch centre back we kept getting linked with.
Botman. James, don't shoot it down, please. No, James, no, I can't handle it. I can't, James. I can't.
Again, that was one that it's one, and because it's kind of a bit different in my job now, because we're, again, going back to what we said before with the Echo, when you're having to write 5 or 6 stories a day, one of them, it's an easy one to tick off, going, well, here's 8 paragraphs on why that transfer room is absolute rubbish. And obviously I don't do that now at the Echo, at the Athletic. It's just not something I have to do, but you still feel as a bit of a duty when people are asking you, saying, should I be getting excited about this? And and if you've got the contacts to be able to check it out with, and I got told by 2 or 3 people about Botman, absolute rubbish. It must be his agent. It must be his agent just using Liverpool's name to try and get him a move. I mean, similar in a way to, what was it? Was it the previous summer with Nicolas Pepe before he went to Arsenal?
Yes.
Kept on getting linked with him. And again, everyone I spoke to said it's absolute rubbish. And there were stories written in France saying that, not only were Liverpool in for him, but it was it was done, the fee was agreed, the contract was sorted. And And every time it was like, it's not true. It's 100% not true. So yeah, I suppose that's one of the, there's many downsides of social media, but one of them is it has enabled transfer rumors to grow like a whole life of their own, even though, quite often there's very, very little substance behind them. And you end up, sometimes the rumors are so ridiculous that you don't even need to chase them up. I mean, anything in January that involved a massive fee, you just knew was rubbish, because everyone knew that Liverpool didn't have money to spend in January, and so it was proved with the business they did on deadline day for the two centre backs they brought in. But yeah, with the other rumours, you try and check them out, and usually try and make sure that they're kind of double sourced from two different places before you put your head on the chopping block and tweet something out, knowing full well that if you end up being wrong, you'll never get forgiven for it. So yeah, it always amazes me how the ability of people to find old tweets from like years and years ago. I thought, because I probably make the mistake of never ever deleting any tweets. Yeah, it's amazing. Like, it's amazing how people twist things as well. Because whether it's, I think it was probably the February before we bought Alisson, I'd written that Liverpool weren't going to bid for him, and so then you get and even like last summer, you knock something down, and then someone will send you the link going, well, you said this, and I said, well, look at the date on that. It was February. That was like 5 months before Liverpool signed Alisson. That was when Roma were quoting Liverpool 90 odd million. That story was right at the time, because Liverpool were never going to pay 95 million for Alisson. So yeah, there's that. But that's that you just have to live with that, I think, as a reporter, because the reality is that things can change so fast, and all you can do is try and find out what the deal is with a certain rumor at that particular time.
So
yeah, I'll be honest, James. As somebody who's kind of in the know way before everybody else, does it kind of, because obviously being a Liverpool fan as well, like for example, when I was at uni and I was doing film studies, having to study the film in a different way sometimes can spoil watching the film, because you start seeing things other people don't see, you notice things, and when you make films, you also start noticing things. So I almost had to unlearn everything I learned to enjoy movies again, if that makes sense, because it started to spoil watching films. Being a fan of Liverpool especially, does it spoil transfer deadline day and the excitement of transfers when you kind of know before we do, and you can't get excited about things like the way we do because you know the truth and stuff like that? Does it ruin being a football fan, being such a high level journalist?
It definitely ruins being a football fan. Yeah, 100%. Because the reality is that obviously the fan in you wants deadline day to be massively exciting. Yeah, I've got to be perfectly honest. The dream deadline day for me as a journalist is that absolutely nothing happens, because there's nothing more stressful than the Liverpool going berserk on deadline day, and you're trying to ring agents, you're trying to ring people at the club, you're trying to ring whoever else contacts you might have abroad at the other club Liverpool are negotiating with to try and get a lead, and and also with what happens quite often these days, Liverpool might be conducting 2 or 3 negotiations at the same time, even though they might in the end they will only pursue one of those deals, which is essentially what they did with when they opted for Tsimikas last summer, and what happened with when they went for Jota rather than Sarr. So yeah, I think that is definitely part of it. That yeah, and do you know what? I'd say it's not even just on deadline day. I'd say it even extends right through to match days, in terms of, probably a bit different now in my current job. But when I was at the Echo, even because on the one hand, if Liverpool are drawing 1-1 with 2 minutes to go, the fan in you just I'll give anything for Liverpool to score a late winner here. But of course, the journalist in you and thinking, I've only got 15-20 minutes after the game. If Liverpool score now, I'm going to have to rewrite half my piece, because I've spent half the piece slagging them off because they haven't been able to score all second half. So I suppose the perfect example of that would be what happened against Dortmund in in the Europa League quarterfinal, when that was pretty much written. Liverpool are out, and then bang bang bang, Lovren scores that goal. And on the one hand, I was out on my seat dancing in the aisles in the press box that night. But then quite soon after that initial bout of euphoria, you're thinking, shit, I've just got to delete about 600 words. I've got 15 minutes to write another 600 words, so I better crack on.
Yeah.
No, I can imagine. You probably just ruined Matt's evening because Matt's a massive Botman fan. So it was actually one of the questions I was actually going to ask you as well. So that
there's no point. It's already done. It's over. It's over.
No, but it could be the Alisson situation. It could change in a couple of months' time.
I'm not ruling him out for the summer. There's
hope, James. If there's hope, I'm clinging on to it, mate. I'm telling you. I'm just letting you know from now. If there's a bit of hope, right? You know what I mean?
So, again, without putting you too much on the spot, the rumours of Koletikar then, given what you just said in terms of the lack of money that was available in January, was that a nonsense rumour as well then?
I think there was definitely some interest there. I couldn't tell you exactly why it didn't happen in the end, but he was certainly on the shortlist that was drawn up. I think in the end it was just a very difficult deal to try and do, and there were cheaper, more straightforward options. So it'd be interesting to see what happens there in the summer, because obviously you've got to make a decision on Quebec, whether they decide to trigger the opt-in for £15 million plus add-ons. And I suppose the difficult thing as well will be trying to figure out exactly where Van Dijk and Gomez and Matip are up to, because on the one hand you think, well, you've got three frontline centre halves coming back there, yet all three of them have had bad injuries, and I think it's completely unrealistic to think that maybe one of them might be back to absolute the level expected to come the start of next season, but probably unlikely to think that two or three of them will be.
Yeah, very true. So again, speaking about injuries, we've been just decimated this season. I think I read something just before we came on air that Leicester City are the second most affected team with injuries this season, and we've had double the amount of players out for the time they've been out than Leicester have, and they're second in the table in terms of how they've been impacted by injuries. Now, in terms of priority positions for us to strengthen in the summer, do you have any indications as to which positions we're looking to strengthen? Not necessarily players, but positions.
Yeah, I think it'll be through the spine of the team, because I think when you look at it, clearly there's going to be some big decisions to make there at centre back, as we just discussed. I think centre midfield is looking, I think every single week that goes by, it becomes more likely that Gini Wijnaldum will leave as a free agent. So that is a big gap to be filled, and I think Curtis Jones has done absolutely magnificently, especially in recent months, and I think we'll be seeing a lot more of him next season as well. But I think there's decisions to be made there, definitely. I think you look at the midfield and you think, Oxlade-Chamberlain has had a really disappointing season this season. Injured for the first half of it, just hasn't been able to make an impression when he has been given game time in the second half of the season. Naby Keita, again, probably for no real fault of his own, hasn't. We all said this is the season, this is make or break for Naby Keita. It hasn't been, and people say to me, "Oh, Liverpool have just got to get rid this summer," but I just think it's such a simplistic idea that you just get rid of Naby, because it's like, well, how much of a hit are you going to have to take financially? And I just don't think that's really the Klopp way. I think he still sees a player there, and if it was an attitude issue, what's that? Sorry.
So does Matt. You're talking about Matt's favourite player. So yeah,
right.
That's why
I'm just going to let him land. I wasn't even going to say that. I'm not yet, anyway.
Yeah, it just feels like you go around in circles talking about Naby Keita, because
I know the feeling.
Yeah, it's just when he's had so many little spells where you've gone, well, that's it. Naby Keita's finally arrived at Liverpool, and then inevitably you'll have some other issue. Then you don't see him for you'll get told it'll be 2 or 3 weeks. That will suddenly become 4 or 5 weeks. Then that becomes 6 or 7 weeks, and then before you know it, another big chunk of the season's gone. And it just feels like that's where we are with him. But so obviously that's a decision to make this summer. And then further forward, I think probably the most fascinating thing for me will be what Klopp does in terms of those attacking options, because I love Roberto Firmino, an absolute, but 6 goals in 36, 37 games this season. His return is going down year on year, and I just feel more that I've always defended him on the basis that he is so much more than a goal scorer. He's not a normal number 9. He's a link player, very unselfish. I just also think other areas of his game have dipped as well, and he's not as effective. And what has hurt Liverpool is the fact that Divock Origi just and he can be a really infuriating player, Origi, and again, like, he's another he's such a legend of the club, Origi, in terms of the iconic goals he scored. He's the kind of fella, if he walks into the Albert pub outside Anfield in 40 years' time, everyone now will be wanting to buy him a drink because of what he's done for. He'll never be forgotten, Divock Origi, because of what he's done. But the reality is, I saw something the other day. I think since that goal in Madrid, he scored something like 7 in 60 appearances for Liverpool. And
wow,
and I think there's been a lot of games recently where Firmino has stayed on, where I think it's not because there's any great belief that Firmino was going to score. It was more, you look at the bench and you think, well, is Origi really going to give us any better than we're getting at the moment? And I think that's why I think, I wrote an article recently about Firmino, and it wasn't, obviously when you write about a particular player, you then get accused of scapegoating someone. And it wasn't that at all, because, I love Firmino. And I think fatigue is a big part of it. He's played a ridiculous amount of football.
Yes.
For me. Like, you're talking 280 odd games for Liverpool in 5 and 3/4 seasons, all of the Brazil commitments on top of that. And I just think, and of course getting Jota back helps, but I still think Liverpool need to upgrade on Origi this summer. And, Liverpool, I wrote back in November, probably late November, maybe early December, Liverpool were open to offers for Origi in January. I think if they'd got offered, I think if they'd have got a suitable offer, he would have gone and Minamino would have stayed. But as it was, they didn't get anything approaching what they thought was value for him. But yeah, I'd be really surprised if Origi was still at Liverpool next season.
Yeah, you've just broken Drifty's heart now, James. You broke Matt's heart with Botman. You've broken Drifty's heart.
Ironically, that was literally all 3 of our favourite players without James even knowing what he was doing.
That is so true,
It was the irony is just crazy. Like, Firmino's Callum's favourite player. So, you know what it is about Divock though, James? Because I've got a little agenda of
little.
I've got a big agenda of defending him. But for me, what it is, like you said, like as you just mentioned, like Firmino will stay on longer than he should, and then Origi doesn't really get the game time, or maybe like 5 minutes here and there. And I'm not gonna lie, 60 games and only 7 goals. It is damning to hear that as a statistic. Like, I get that, but I still look at it from an objective point of view as someone who does love him. And I think if you count the minutes, then we really start to see it doesn't look as bad as it is. And then if you think about, he never gets a run of games. Like, for me personally right now, like, I do love Firmino as well, don't get me wrong, but right now, I don't even see the harm in Origi playing 2 or 3 games in a row to just see what he can do based on evidence we've seen him in the past. Like, I just personally don't get it. I feel like Origi deserves to be given more of a chance. I do.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point what you say there about it's very difficult for players who don't have rhythm to suddenly get thrown in when you get 10, 15 minutes here and go, right, go now, produce, show us what you can do. And then, knowing full well that, they're going to be back on the bench the next game anyway. And so, yeah, I really like Divock Origi. I really hoped on the back of Madrid that would be like, the real kind of rocket that he needed to really kick on, because I think back to his form, before he got that horrendous challenge from Funes Mori in the Merseyside derby. He was absolutely flying before then. When you think of his performances against Dortmund in the Europa League, and so yeah, and he's still relatively young. It feels like he's been around forever, Divock Origi. But yeah, it does feel like I don't know. And you're right, Drifty. In terms of I have some sympathy with it for him in terms of not. It's very difficult when you're not given a run. But then, by the same token, if you're not doing it when you are given some minutes, you don't have the manager's trust and faith to then give you those starts. So he's in a bit of a vicious circle at the moment.
Yeah. I just feel sorry for him. I really do, and that's why I defend him. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree.
James, just quickly, I just want to.
Oh, go on,
oh, sorry, no, just quickly. Yeah, James, I want to ask you. See with the whole Naby Keita thing, because. Again, I understand the injuries and people want to get on his back, but obviously we see a talent that he is when he does play. But from your understanding, as things stand right now, do you think Liverpool are most likely to sell him, or do you think they'll probably give him another go at least and see what happens until the end of the season? Or do you think the writing's already on the wall for Naby, in your opinion?
No, I don't think the writing's already on the wall for him at all. I think I would be surprised if Liverpool sold him this summer. And I think probably for a number of reasons. One being that Klopp is a very loyal manager to players. As long as, I think probably the exception to the rule in terms of patience would be Mamadou Sakho, in terms of someone that really annoyed him and got bombed out of the club soon after. But, as long as your attitude is right, and the manager thinks you're doing everything you possibly can to make the most of your ability and make yourself available, then and on that front, I've never heard a bad word about Keita in terms of, there's no suggestion that, there's a lack of heart there or a lack of fight or anything like that. So, and I think the other thing is, probably maybe a bit cynical, but I think even if you were going to sell him this summer, how much would you get for him? I think you'd probably be lucky to get half of what Liverpool paid. What was it, 52.75 million? I think realistically, you'd be lucky to get half of that. And where I think to me, it just makes a lot more sense to keep him, and because he is still relatively young as well. And I think that's another thing in modern football is everything's become kind of so short term, hasn't it? And if that doesn't work, bin him off, get someone else in, bin him off, and it's easier said than done. It's like similar in a way to Oxlade-Chamberlain, what he does with him. I mean, it's all people. I wrote about him recently, and people say, "Oh, just get rid of him." And it's like, well, Liverpool paid £35 million for him. You don't, not going to give him a free transfer, are they? He's on probably, it'd be on 100 grand plus a week. There's some big decisions to be made there, and I think you have to also factor in the fact that that there's some changes that need to happen this summer. But it's going to be happening in the summer where money, again, is going to be an issue because, we're not going to have fans back in Bramfield until next season. So, the financial hit from COVID, and I know a lot of people just don't like hearing about it, but, that is the reality for a club like Liverpool where FSG don't take any money out of the club, but they also don't put their own money into it. The books have to be balanced. And, when revenues are taking a massive hit, that again has a knock-on effect in terms of what you can do in the transfer market. And that's why the next few months are absolutely huge for Liverpool, because they need to be in that top four, because if they're not, then I don't even think it's so much the pulling power, because I still think Klopp and Liverpool, the name counts for a hell of a lot, but it's that finance, it's that you only have to look at you're talking about £100 million if you go all the way in the Champions League, and even if you were to replicate that in the Europa League, you're lucky to get a third of that amount. So it's that's why the next few weeks are so massive.
Definitely.
Yeah, you mentioned three letters that we weren't going to speak about, but you've mentioned them now. And if to be completely transparent with you, us on the channel have been quite vocal about the whole FSG situation. I've probably been the most vocal. you made a good point there where you said they don't take money out of the club, which is a good thing, but they also don't put money in. Do you think we'll get to a point where we potentially outgrow them as a model, considering our competition, not because of them being bad owners, but because of our competition, the likes of Man City, Chelsea, Everton have now really being backed financially as well? Do you think we'll be in a position where we have to analyse that?
Yeah, do you know what? It kind of ties in with a really great article my colleague Simon Hughes wrote on The Athletic last week about kind of like, is it possible to have like a dynasty of success with the FSG ownership model? And he was comparing it to what had happened with the Red Sox in Boston, and in terms of, and it is interesting, and I think it is a really topical discussion at the moment, because and it's and obviously I think FSG tend to polarize opinion, don't they? And if you say anything remotely positive about them, you get accused of being an apologist and all the rest of it. But it's, you have to frame it around the fact that, they have not been bad owners for Liverpool Football Club. They have been the owners that, that solved the stadium issue, built the new main stand, built a new £50 million training ground. They appointed Jurgen Klopp. They appointed Michael Edwards. And Liverpool have won the biggest prizes you could possibly lay your hands on in football in the last few years. So you can't just kind of like shove that to one side and disregard it. But it's also quite fair and right that fans go, well, hang on a minute, how are we going to sustain it? We didn't want to just be back for a year or 2 or 3. We want to be back for good, to be competing at the top level. And and I think, and that's where also you've got to bear in mind that the pandemic, it feels like it came at a horrendous time for Liverpool. Liverpool haven't really been able to cash in on that glory in terms of the commercial and sponsorship side, and there's been a lot. It just felt like they haven't really been able to make the most of what should have been this unbelievable opportunity to generate money that then would have gone back into the club. And also the pandemic, and because I don't even know what the latest figure is in terms of how much it's cost Liverpool compared to what they'd have expected to generate. The last I heard was about 120 million, and I'm sure that goes up every single week with games behind closed doors. So and then you're right, you get into the realms of, well, if they can't compete at the top end of the transfer market, then should someone else take it on? But then you're in the realms of, well, who else is there? There's no sign that I've seen that they're considering selling up. I think they're in the process at the moment. We understand of selling about a 10% stake in Fenway Sports Group, which again, that's something that's been on the agenda for many years. We're going back probably 4 or 5 years now. Whenever there was takeover rumors that came up, whenever I spoke to anyone in Boston, they'd always say, well, no, there's no way we're selling the club. We're always open to selling a minority stake, it looks like that's going to happen. So it'll be interesting to see what that does in terms of whether that frees up funds to be invested. Because the other thing is that they are, no matter what anyone says about them, of course they got involved at Liverpool because they saw a fantastic business opportunity. But they also know that the best possible way to make the most and maximize your investment is to be successful. And if you're not successful, then the value of your asset won't be sustained. So I think I don't really go along with the idea that on the back of what's happened this season, that their ownership should suddenly be dismissed as a problem as such. Because I think if you rewind to last summer, I think about signing Jota was a great signing. Everyone was over the moon that they went and got Thiago. I think the only complaint before a ball kick this season, which was a fair one, was why have Liverpool not gone and signed another centre back? That was, and that's not hindsight because of what happened to Van Dijk and Gomez and Matip. That was just common sense at the time, that why are you going into a season with only 3 frontline centre backs? And but even I get that because they felt that they were prioritizing because finance was a problem due to the pandemic. Now you can say, well, is that acceptable for a club as big as Liverpool to be having to prioritize when we are just off the back of winning the Premier League? But then you end up back in what you're talking about, different business models. You mentioned Everton there. You look at their balance sheets the last couple of seasons. They're losing a huge sums of money each year, because at the moment Mashiri is happy to do that, but I don't know, is that sustainable? I'm not sure that's sustainable going forward. So yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see what happens with FSG. I always think that they're nowhere near people will have you believe. Are they perfect football club owners? No. Have they made mistakes? Yes. But no one should ever lose sight as well of the good things they've done.
Fair enough. I mean, I think one day we'll have to sit down and have a dedicated show with you about FSG. I think the people would love to see that. But before we let you go, James, again, massive thanks for coming on. Just want to play a little game. So I'm going to read out some names of some players, and I want you to answer with 3 answers. So you've got 3 answers you can give. You can give bad news Pearce, which is no chance. You can have no news Pearce, which is not too sure. And good news Pearce is a possibility. So I'm going to go around and read the names out for you. Okay. This is where it could become heartbreaking as well. So Rafa Varane.
Oh, I would probably say bad news Pearce.
Oh.
That's
there you go, boys.
Let's stop it now. Let's stop it now, mate.
Ismail Assar.
Oh, that's a tricky one, see, because someone asked me about this the other day, and because Liverpool obviously really liked him last summer, the only reason they didn't go for him, went for Jota instead, was because of Watford's crazy financial demands, and in particular, Watford wanted a huge amount of the money up front in installments, which obviously was the way Liverpool wanted to do it. So, I'd have to say no news Pearce on that one, on the basis that I couldn't tell you for definite they're still in for him yet. It would be very odd if, having really liked him last summer, they'd gone completely cold. One thing I will say on Sarr is that there were some crazy quotes from his agent recently suggested that Liverpool were signing him in January. Now, I didn't even tweet about that at the time because I just couldn't deal with the inevitable backlash. But apparently that was absolute rubbish. Liverpool were, not surprisingly, I think, again, one of them ones where surely common sense dictates that in a window when Liverpool desperately needed a centre-back and didn't have any money for that, they were never going to buy a forward for 40-odd million. But Liverpool definitely weren't back in for him in January.
Fair enough. Koulibaly.
I think that's definitely a bad news Pearce.
Okay.
Too old, too expensive.
Haaland.
I think that would have to be a no news Pearce, on the basis that I just don't see that happening this summer, because I think if he does go anywhere this summer, there'll be a ridiculous auction in terms of the price going through the roof. And I think obviously he's got this release clause, hasn't he, that only kicks in summer 2020 for kind of 65-70 million. So I mean, if he doesn't go anywhere this summer, I'd be absolutely amazed if Liverpool weren't in for him in 2022. But of course, the reality is that he would have a huge long list of clubs wanting to do the same at that price, because the release clause is crazy low when you look at what he's doing at the moment.
Fair enough. Rafinha from Leeds.
Come on, James.
No, again, do you know what no, I think that's a no news as well. I think it's Yeah,
no news is better than bad news, Matt.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I'll take that, James. I'll take it, mate.
It's definitely not one that's been rubbished by anyone to me when I've spoken to them. But I think the reality is at the moment that it's very difficult for Liverpool to make plans, not knowing what the next, where they're going to be come the middle of May. Yeah. Because, I wish I was privy to the lists. I'm not, but I'm sure there's almost lists of names dependent on whether they're in the top 4 and whether they're not in the top 4. Because that is how significant it is financially.
Yeah,
definitely.
Two more names for you, and then we'll wrap up. Pedro Neto.
Do you know what? I do really like him. Every time I watch him play, I do think he does have the look of a Liverpool player, doesn't he? And I can't. I'd be absolutely lying if I said that I could give you any particular guidance on whether he was someone who they were thinking of going for. So no, definitely, it's not good news, but it's not bad news on that front.
I'll take that. I'll definitely take that. and then the last name on the list, Kylian Mbappe. And I'm going to change the stipulation. Liverpool do get top 4.
Oh, okay. Again, I mean, there's obviously people say, "Oh, are Liverpool interested in him?" And it's like, well, of course, who in their right mind wouldn't be interested in Mbappe? I think, again, the major issue is how on earth do you make that work financially? And I saw some stuff knocking around today that. That almost like Liverpool with the front runners and all the rest of it. And you're like, well, hang on a minute, just for a start, when you look at, what the fee, I know his contract is running down, but still, the fee would still be substantial this summer. The wage is astronomical. That would completely destroy Liverpool's entire wage structure. So no, I mean, I've always thought in the last kind of 12 to 18 months that someone like Haaland or Mbappe only really becomes possible if Liverpool were, I don't know, say for argument's sake, Salah or Mane were to turn around and want to move and say, look, I want a challenge, and there was an eye-watering sum of money on the table, a bit like what happened with Coutinho, then I suddenly think, an Mbappe or a Haaland becomes something that's remotely possible. But if you're saying to me, everyone stays put, you get rid of Origi this summer, are you upgrading Origi with Mbappe? Then as much as I'd love to say yes, I just don't think that's particularly realistic, especially in this financial climate, whether Liverpool get top 4 or not, because Liverpool's account should be out actually pretty much any day, I think. And they will only provide a small insight into the real damage of COVID, because I think the accounts will only go up to kind of probably the back end of June last year. But yeah, they won't be pretty, and obviously the next lot will be even worse. So I know people say to me, "Oh yeah, but the Nike link, and surely Nike could make it happen." And you're like, well, I'm not aware of any situation where Nike write out checks for 100 million quid to link up with one of their athletes with a club that they happen to make the kit for as well. So yeah, as much as I'd love Mbappe to happen, I'd absolutely love to be proved wrong. I wouldn't be getting him put on the back of a shirt yet.
Fair enough.
James, just quickly, just one last thing I have to ask you. So obviously, just quickly, again, you touched about the striker situation. And in your mind, I think I read your article, and I find it kind of puzzling that people even thought that you were saying, Firmino should leave. It was more of a case of, we just need someone to kind of ease the burden. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Whether he goes to a 10 or whether he even comes off the bench, but he's still a part of Liverpool. In your opinion, if Liverpool were to get a striker next season, and we finish in the top 4, who do you, in your opinion, would you say is realistic?
Well, do you know what? It was interesting actually, because our data guy Tom Warville did a piece at the weekend, and he was looking at all the data and analytics. Obviously, we know that Liverpool are very, very hot on in terms of in terms of studying. And interestingly, he did the same thing for the left backs last summer, and this was like a couple of months before anything happened, and he came up with Tsimikas as being like, all the numbers said that Tsimikas was almost like a mirror image of Andy Robertson. I know we've barely seen Tsimikas, have we? And there's that, and then even with the centre back situation, Kabak came up in his data quite highly as well. So he threw up some interesting names. I mean, one of them was that Jonathan David, who I know was on Liverpool's shortlist last summer. It was him, it was Sarr at Watford, and Jota when they decided to go for him. So it's I think at the moment, and again, like Tom, when he was looking at all the data last week, he was saying to me, can you give me some parameters in terms of price and in terms of are we going to be looking to replace Firmino? Are we going to be looking to upgrade Origi? What is it? And I said to him, well, more likely than not, it'll be upgrading Origi, because I just don't see a situation where Klopp adores Firmino. I think it'll be to ease the burden on him rather than replace him. So Andre Silva at Eintracht Frankfurt, he was another one that the data suggested. Darwin Núñez at Benfica. And then Gouiri, I think is pronounced, is it, at Nice, and Embolo at Mönchengladbach.
Brilliant Embolo,
yeah. So something, and at the moment, I'd say probably someone kind of what you'd regard as, say, a lesser stature, and not as big a name is probably more likely at the moment, especially if we're talking about upgrading Origi.
Yeah, fair points. Well, James, got to say a massive thank you for coming on. Really do appreciate it. You gave us some great insights, some great talking topics, and I think I could speak for Matt and Drift when we say really enjoyed this one. Obviously, we wish you had given
definitely.
We wish you'd given a good news Pearce to some of the names, but obvious reasons we can't. But where can the viewers find you, James? Where's the best place to find you?
Yeah, well, I'm over on theathletic.co.uk as the Liverpool reporter, and obviously James Pearce LFC on Twitter. So have a look at that. There's some interesting stuff coming up in the next few days on the Athletic.
Brilliant. And guys, thank you very much for watching. We're on the road to 20k, as you can see, so please do smash the subscribe if you haven't already. Smash the like button, leave a comment, make sure you go and follow and support James. Matt Drift, anything you want to say before we leave?
No, I mean, it would have been nice to have got a good news on Mbappe, but I always knew that wasn't going to happen anyway. You know what I mean? So, but no, pleasure having you on, James, man. It was a great discussion, man. I really enjoyed it.
Sorted. Nice chat to you, lads.
Yes, I say thanks again, James, and hopefully if we do this again, it will be a good news Pearce on Haaland or Mbappe. Who knows? Let's see what happens there.
Let's hope so.
But no, absolute pleasure having you on. Thank you very much for everyone that watched, and until next time, stay safe, stay blessed. We are Kop-Ish, and we are out. Take care.
Peace.